Good morning. I am Jessica Waite, the president of Very Good Food. Our podcast, Growing a Food Movement, is a forum for discussion about building a more resilient local food system. The COVID pandemic has emphasized the need for this resilience and has challenged many of us with the opportunity to create new systems and strategies. We've also seen an outpouring of support for our local businesses and our local heroes. This podcast Zoom series, The Bright Side, will highlight stories of growth and innovation as we discuss how we use these lessons to create momentum towards a healthier future. And today, hello, we have David, who is the Executive Director of Farmers Footprints. And speaking of heroes in our community, I would like to say that farmers are at the top of that list. So welcome, David, and thank you for everything you do to advocate for those farmers.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I know, I'm so excited to chat with you again. There's so much I want to know about all of your work. So I guess to start us out, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and really what you were focused on over the last year or so prior to COVID?
Sure. Yeah, Farmers Footprint. We're a young nonprofit. We started back in 2019 with the launch of a short documentary called Regeneration, and that was a story following a farm family up in Minnesota, Grant and Dawn Breitkreutz, and their multi-generational farm. They were on the vanguard in their area of regenerative transition away from sort of conventional chemical agriculture. And so we produced a film that showed those struggles that they were going through, and also the transformation that they were going through as they sort of took back their ability to grow. And so what was born out of that was an organization dedicated to catalyzing the mass adoption of regenerative agriculture throughout the food system. And I'd say even wider than that, a sense of regenerative thinking as a mindset, not even just a set of agricultural practices, but a realignment with the way that we interact with the land, with nature, and with each other. And so that's what we're working on day in, day out. We do a lot of that work through storytelling, elevating the voices of farmers and folks who work in the food system, and as well as a whole lot of other things alongside my co-founder, Dr. Zach Bush, who really works his messaging around tying agriculture, soil health with human health, and that's been the big underlying current in a lot of our narratives.
Which is obviously such an important topic. I think early on during the pandemic, I listened to a podcast with Zach Bush with Rich Roll talking about it was kind of an emphasis on the human health component, because I think we've had this movement toward like, what can we do to sterilize our communities right now and plasticize them? I mean, I don't know if plasticize is a word, but I've been using it. And it's been a really sad thing to see, when really we should be looking kind of within and looking at our food system and how it can kind of create support for us with our immunities. And so Dr. Bush was really great to listen to about that, because of course that was kind of his emphasis about building immunities and gut biome health and all of the things that we should be doing to really reinforce our strength as organisms, as as individuals. But I would like to ask a little bit more. I remember hearing about how you support those farmers, like in your efforts, like the transition from the economic factors, and also kind of more of a I don't know if you'd call it an emotional support system, or kind of a societal or community-based support system. Like, what does that transition look like for those farmers, and how does your organization really promote and support that?
Right. Well, just one point on how you set up that question around the idea of biodiversity, and diversity in general is something that is really a pillar of regenerative agriculture. We are talking about ways to incorporate diversity in what is primarily a monoculture farming system right now. And similarly, with this move to transition farmers, we've worked really hard to bring in a diversity of voices, and we look to Zach sort of stepping across lines from a clinical doctor or cancer research therapist, cancer therapies researcher, over to agriculture, and introducing now a dialogue between a farmer or doctor. We saw the power of that crossover, and that's really just a diversity of voices within an existing conversation. So we do the same thing in support of farmers. It's about telling their story. It's about bringing more folks with their backgrounds, expertise, and passion into this work, and understanding why agriculture really touches us all, even if we've never set foot on a farm. And so we broadly look at that through a couple pillars. I mean, storytelling, as I mentioned, but transition to regen is such a complex problem, and it touches sort of so many different aspects of our economy and our society. And so we've sort of boiled that down into, there's either a need, first and foremost, to connect consumers closer to the farm and farmers, and understand what sort of work farmers actually do and why it's so important. But also for the farmers themselves, there's needs for education, there's need for economic support, there's need for policy-based support. All of these things, go toward the fact that a farmer has their identity very, very much wrapped up into the way that they operate their land. And so when we talk about all these sort of mechanical issues of, yes, more education, and yes, more financing, or better policy, it actually starts with a behavior change and sort of a transformation of self. And so that I look at as one of the big parts of what we do, and why we are trying to create an emotional connection, a person-to-person connection between everyone and the farmers that feed us. And then we can backfill in all the additional resources that we know we're going to need. But it really starts with that behavior change, and meeting a farmer, where they're at emotionally, wherever that happens to be in their journey towards a different, operating model.
I love that. That's incredible. And then for our guests that might be maybe a little lost because we do this, I tend to forget that not everyone is falling asleep reading The Call of the Reed Warbler and, the ground every night. When we talk about regenerative agriculture, maybe compared to conventional agriculture, as we all, think of agriculture, what is that really like on a quick and dirty, like, what does that look like? What is that? What does that mean to the average consumer?
Sure. Well, I would say, broadly take a look at the word regenerative first. And to me, I think about that as cyclical, something that is cycling and moving resources through. And every process in nature is cyclical. So that's a metaphor that you can play in all day. When we talk about it in terms of agriculture, we're really talking about realigning our agriculture with the cycles of nature. So, instead of taking a field, tilling it down to the dirt in between each of your cash crops, we're actually allowing a diverse range of what we call cover crops to grow soil and always keep it covered. We're always keeping a living root in that soil. And that's simply a mirror of what we would see in those lands if there wasn't any agriculture there. Nature is cycling nutrients and cycling biodiversity through the soil constantly. And so we're bringing our agriculture, which is, very much I'm going to dominate and control the land, and moving it to this more, I would say, more of a feminine archetype, really, of collaboration, co-creation, and allowing movement through that cycle. And what that does is it not only feeds the microbiome in the soil, it's feeding it life through all of those living roots and never tilling the soil, but it's also cycling greenhouse gases. That covered soil is pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it in the ground. And this is nature's technology through soil to actually reverse climate change. And so if we can align our food production with this existing natural cycle, that works, better in many ways than any sort of technology, a box or a gizmo that we can create. We can do this on all of our soils across the world. And this is again, realigning with a natural cycle that nature has already provided for us.
Absolutely. Because I think we come along and we think, wow, we could do it way better than nature. And we're totally wrong. Nature was perfect, and
Right.
and all those systems made so much sense. And then we tried to do better with inputs, and we don't really, it was naive. And now we need to get back to a place where we're listening a little bit more. And then, for those that might be like, okay, great, this is, good for the environment, but what about me? Why is this so relevant to human health when, this kind of more feeding that biome, that diversity within the soil?
Yeah, there's just amazing complexity and diversity in the soil, and what that really equates to is the more complexity and interaction that's happening down there, that's sending more complexity and nutrients up into the plants that we are eating. So, to give you a sense, if we are continually spraying our soil with pesticides, if we're continually, injecting it with synthetic sort of small molecule fertilizers that are providing synthetic nutrients to the plants, we're eating those same synthetic nutrients. They're not actually being created, via nature in all her intelligence and ability to provide nutrients. So, we have this scenario where, if we can stay away from pumping the soil with synthetic and let it do it on its own, now we start to get, much more nutritious and delicious food that's coming out, because it's not just a hollow shell of soil that we are having to add everything in. By the way, if we're able to feed all that soil with those complex nutrients, we are also not buying inputs that we then have to put into the soil synthetically. So this ends up becoming a really compelling economic argument for the farmer who feels like thousands of acres that they're having to inject with chemicals just to get the same yield year after year. We actually can cut that completely out and say, let nature do what it knows how to do. If you're cycling nutrients through, then you're getting all the nutrients that plant needs. We're focusing on soil health, and as a consequence of that, we have plant health, and as a consequence of that, we have human health. And so it's really just rejoining that process that already exists.
It's so awesome. Thank you so much for this. I just love hearing all of this, because you make it so easy to understand, and it's so simple, and it's so important. And to just be able to get all of that into 10 minutes is incredible. So thank you. So really moving back to kind of the direction we're talking about as far as this particular conversation, and looking at, this thing that has happened over the last couple of months where all of our organizations and operations kind of had to take a little bit of a shift based on this global pandemic. How did that really change the way that you and your organization were operating?
Well, certainly on the outside, things certainly changed. Our team moved all remote, and, we had to make a lot of the same shifts that a lot of organizations are going through right now. In terms of mindset, it's been a really good time to be involved in food issues, even on the nonprofit side. We have, folks who are now bumping into quite viscerally the lack of resilience in our food supply chains. And I know it's sort of evened out a little bit right now, but early on we knew that going to the grocery store was a pretty hectic trip out. And if you just elbowed someone in the face to try to get a cauliflower, you're starting to now understand, what is going on with the food system. Everything that I thought was going to just always be there on the shelf, maybe that's no longer the case. And so it really presented a fascinating opportunity for this message of, let's take a close look at the food supply chain and where those chinks in the armor are, because now consumers are feeling that in a way that they've never probably had to contend with before. And so that was a powerful moment for us to land a message with folks that that maybe we couldn't have ever done quite in the same way, because everyone's looking out their window and they are feeling it for real. So for us, it's been an incredible opportunity. I think, you know, to go even more macro with it, it's an incredible opportunity for all of us to sit in a little more quiet, and as we're sort of locked in our homes, and reflect about what can we change in this system going forward? Why did this happen? And what are the ways that I'm contributing to the status quo? What have I always wanted to fix in that? And I can tell you from the conversations that I'm having that is happening, you know, across the board. We talk to investment professionals around, you know, figuring out a potential impact fund around our work. And, you know, these are the folks at the top levels of finance who are turning the dials, so to speak, on the world economy. And they are thinking about this too. If Zach and I are sharing messages of switching from a non-consumptive extractive or a consumptive extractive economy over to something that is regenerative, as I defined it at the top of the episode. And these folks are like, yes, we realize that something is very off, and this is not going to be a sustainable way of doing business going forward. So the transformation is without a doubt, you know, powerful, and it is crossing, you know, obviously we're seeing now it's crossing social justice boundaries, and you know, all these things are now starting to run into each other, and we understand how connected we really are on so many of these movements and so many of these fronts. So to me, it's been a time of really inspiration and great hope for what is to come out of this on the other end, because it is not going to be the same. There is not going to be a return to normal as we have known it. And I think that's probably a very good thing for us right now.
Yeah, that's incredible. Just the idea that we've all kind of gotten shaken up a little bit and taken a look at where our food is coming from, because it's so easy to think that it just, you know, shows up in the grocery store. And
Sure.
I think the average consumer might just be a little bit blind to that it really does come from the ground, and the impact of how it's produced and how it's transported, and the livelihoods of those that are creating it, and really finding ways to, you know, kind of create local pathways. Because I'm talking to our friends that are farmers, and they say they've never been so busy, and they say they could have planted 3 times as much and still had more demand. And I just look at that and go, God, that is so positive, because talking about creating resilient local food systems, like, what's more resilient for us as a community than to have our food grown nearby? And what's better for our planet and what's better for our bodies than to have that food in our communities? So just this idea that we're all waking up to this, that's a huge silver lining, and something that, you know, seemed really catastrophic at first, and still has been for many, many people.
Sure.
But there's definitely some good. And I think if we use this as an opportunity to look for that good, you know, that's awesome. So, you know, I like you, because you're like me, we spin into this bright side right away. You know, somebody asked me about challenges, and I talk about opportunities for growth, you know, but it's,
That's right.
you know, have you interacting with the farmers that you speak to and that you are a part of your organization and your community, have you run into challenges as far as what they're struggling with currently? Have there been issues of access, or have there been anything like flaws in the system that have been even more highlighted through all of this, just to focus on, you know, any negative we might have seen for a moment, and then we can go back to the bright side?
Yeah, well, you know, again, this and you mentioned it, this sense of making food systems more local, more regionally focused, and getting those supply chains shorter. We're working right now on a you know, specific webisode sort of series that we're doing with a number of different organizations and farmers around this idea of small food, which means can we keep the supply chains? Can we keep these food systems within the regions that they're going to be feeding? And, you know, that's really what I saw right away. We saw farmers having to throw away a lot of food because if you were set up to sell all of your produce into food service like restaurants and the like, and as you know, Jessica, restaurants took a big hit. There was just a giant collective pause, and there's a whole group of truck drivers and processors and farmers that are sitting on the other end of that. So we saw the restaurants close, and for us it meant we could go and bake some bread and cook more meals at home. But there was just hundreds of thousands of people on the other end of that was their bread and butter. That's where they provide their products. And so you saw a really big challenge of those folks. Can I switch over to retail because the grocery stores were doing fine? They had to be open and were selling. And but that's super challenging as well, because you have to change your packaging, you have to change all your relationships. A lot of farmers weren't able to do that. And similarly, we had issues, really big issues, that were in the news around processing. You're showing that if local food systems don't have that capability to process, meat or grain nearby, or those processors, because they're so big, it was unsafe for those workers to actually be doing that work. You were stuck. You couldn't move the meat that you had to, and you couldn't get grain done. And so it just showed how much of an island even these big metropolitan areas. You think of a place like LA as this big, well-connected city. It has 3 or 4 days of food security, and you start cutting off those supply chains. It's gonna get heavy pretty quick in a place like that. And the wild thing about COVID is that nothing physically happened. There wasn't some, a bridge didn't get destroyed. Roads were still, everything was technically open, but we see how much people power it actually takes to keep that machine moving, especially when things are coming from other countries or thousands of miles away. You can start to see how vulnerable those food systems really are, because we're not keeping them close by.
Exactly. Well, and that kind of leads into the question that I was thinking of while you were saying this, which is, knowing what you know and what you've observed, and what has been kind of made more apparent throughout this couple of months, this pandemic. What would your solution to that be? Like, what is a fix so that if this were to happen again, and we all know that things are becoming more and more destabilized in our communities and our planet. How do we stabilize? How do we make sure that we're more resilient the next time this happens?
Yeah, I think it's through relationship that we're able to make our communities more resilient. And we saw an incredible rise in people utilizing CSAs. We're so lucky here in San Diego to have so many small farms around us that really stepped up and were able to provide a lot of value to their community in the form of really nourishing food. And for the first time, a lot of folks were seeking those opportunities out to go and meet their farmer and develop a personal relationship and a direct, consumer relationship with that farmer for the first time. And that's an incredible light of hope for me, that we can continue that and say, let's start really taking a close look at who the people nearby us have the capacity to feed us just amazing food. And there's so many places that have that opportunity. And so to me, it's all about how can we go smaller? How can we start to create some resilience within a given region? And let's stop relying on imported food from far away just because you want to have a mango in the middle of winter. This is not in alignment with the cycles of nature. So I think it's getting people more tapped into that sense of cycles. And no one will teach you that better than a farmer. They are the ones out there day in and day out. They are watching what is happening out in their fields, and they have so much to teach us in terms of that relationship and observation and reverence of nature. And so I think that's the solution. Like, get to know a farmer, and understand what, and acknowledge what they have to teach you about natural systems, and you're going to be healthier for it. You're going to be eating delicious food all along the way, and hopefully you'll have a new friend for when the next time this goes on, because we all could use a little more connection in these times. Hopefully person to person and not just Zoom to Zoom.
Exactly. Getting way too comfortable with this Zoom, even though it is
That's
pretty
right.
nice to be able to connect with so many. I feel like I'm having more conversations now than I did before, just because this is here and we're using it. But
That's right.
no, I love that. And getting to know a farmer is the most incredible thing. I mean, just as a restaurant owner, having farmers show up at the end of the night, park in my parking lot, guests will still see that at the end of the night, and our farmers will show up and they'll have, their containers, and their food is not wrapped in plastic. It has not traveled across the country. It came, it may have been picked that morning. And I know that food is going to be so delicious. And I get to chat with my farmer friends, and we do a little, gossip about the community, and I hear what they're struggling with. It's great. It's a friendship, and it's about building community around food. And I always tell people, like, when, there's issues with avocados, when we can't, today it's difficult to get them from Mexico, and other restaurants are struggling and prices are going up, I don't have to worry. We call up Bailey. He has all the avocados, and he comes with his truck. And so it does create more resilience for businesses too, and for individuals. So it is really exciting, and it's real. It's a real solution. So then, just to wrap this up, I am overwhelmed by how much incredible information you have given us. So thank you so much. This is so exciting. I would like to say, are there any last thoughts about, this ability to kind of look forward toward a brighter, kind of more sustainable food future? Do you have anything else that you're just bubbling over with? Or, have you said it all? Are you very good with this? There was a lot. It was really good.
Well, I mean, never stop learning. If there's one thing that I said that just spurs one other question, just keep following that rabbit hole, and see where that leads you, because you will realize, like me, and I'm not a farmer. I came into this work with a background as an entrepreneur, and did a number of different things. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. It is such an elegant approach to addressing climate change, to addressing the resilience of small rural communities, and the reemergence of the farmer as a key role in society, as really heroes. And so I just say, find out why this is important for you, whether it's you're coming to it from the health side, whether you're coming to it from the social justice side. There's so many ways that agriculture intersects with your everyday life. And I want to also put the spotlight back on you, Jessica, as a creator of a restaurant. You're really on the front lines of storytelling for folks around this. And so if you don't know a farmer yet, go to your favorite restaurant and talk to them about their relationships with farmers and how you can get more involved, because restaurants are where people learn about delicious food. And so get curious about that. Ask questions about where your food is coming from. And I know that folks like Jessica are going to be so excited to tell you how much love and effort they've put into their own supply chains and their own relationships with the farmers that are feeding us. So that's where I would leave it, is please just be curious. You can find us at farmersfootprint.us. Our documentary, the first film we came out with, is free. So please watch that. It's only 20 minutes. And get in touch with us. We are happy to point you in the right direction. We want to be a source of connectivity. There's so many groups out there doing amazing work, like the Very Good Foundation. And so I'm very excited to be in conversation with any of you who are curious about what you've heard today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And to everyone who's listening, thank you for taking the time to engage in this incredible topic. David is so right. Once you start, you won't stop. It's so interesting. It's such a rabbit hole, and it's really exciting. I never thought I'd be a soil nerd, so it just happens. So watch out. Anyway, well, thank you so much. And it was really a pleasure talking to you. And I look forward to possible collaboration in the future and learning more about what your incredible organization accomplishes. So thank you very much.
Loved it. Thank you, Jessica. Really enjoyed the time with you.
Thank you. I'm going to sign us off now. See you.
Okay.